Our next guest is from the nonprofit Accountable Tech, a group that advocates for oversight of tech companies and the power they yield. Joining me now is Rishi Bharwani, Director of Partnerships and Policy at Accountable Tech. Rishi, thanks so much for coming on the show. So the push for regulation of social media is so big, right, that Congress considering action. What might government regulation look like? Let's start there.
Yeah. Look, there's no silver bullet, one piece of legislation that's going to mitigate all of the societal harms that Facebook is driving. But taken together, there are a few things that could make structural change to safeguard our democracy and protect marginalized communities. And Congress is already starting to act on some of these big issues. Earlier this year, the House Judiciary passed a sweeping overhaul of our antitrust laws targeting Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, holding them accountable, and including pieces of legislation like Break 'em Up, which we've heard over the course of the past few years. The first of those bills, the first bill from that package, was introduced in the Senate recently with 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and a third of the Senate Judiciary, which has jurisdiction over this issue. That is a level of bipartisanship that we don't see on other issues. Senate Commerce Committee is holding hearings on what a national federal privacy law could look like, and Silicon Valley's own Representative Anna Eshoo has already announced that she will introduce legislation that goes right at the heart of the business model, legislation that would ban surveillance advertising, this practice that allows Facebook to extract their users' personal data, oftentimes without their consent, turn around and sell that to advertisers. Again, that's how Facebook makes 99% of its revenue. But I'll tell you one more. What Congress needs to do alongside passing these critical pieces of legislation is launch a formal investigation into Facebook that uses subpoena power so we can capture the full scope of societal harms. Because I'll tell you, what Francis has revealed, what's been reported in the Wall Street Journal, that's only the tip of the iceberg. And in fact, just about an hour ago, it was reported there was another whistleblower who reported documents to the SEC. So there's a lot more there, and Congress needs to act now to capture the full scope of societal harms.
Right. So what Francis said, right, is that Facebook knows, it's done the research, it knows that these things are harmful, but it doesn't make that research public, and it still decides to put profits over people. And even if some of its initiatives are harmful, it still goes through with them because it does benefit Facebook's bottom line, which I think was really concerning to a lot of people. And that testimony in front of Congress by Francis Haugen was well received and well respected. My question from you is, as the Director of Partnerships and Policy at Accountable Tech, an advocacy group, what specific changes do you think will better the social media experience?
So there's a number again, but it starts at addressing the business model that is financially incentivized to amplify dangerous, harmful content. That's what Francis was calling out. So a few things that we could do right now to begin protecting our democracy and our communities from the proliferation of COVID mis and disinformation, from Stop the Steal content that we saw lead directly to a violent insurrection on our nation's capital earlier this year, is pass a sweeping federal privacy law that protects from the exploitation and extraction of user data, which Facebook uses to amplify harmful content with surgical precision, knowing what will anger you, what you find divisive. This is per Mark Zuckerberg's own admission that the algorithm naturally amplifies dangerous, extreme, violent content because that's the content that keeps users doom scrolling. That's the content that keeps users hooked on their platform. And so if we cut off the stream to that algorithm, if we no longer allow them unrestricted access to our personal data, that's step one. The second is banning surveillance advertising. This idea that allows them to use our personal data to target ads. Everyone then is seeing their own curated, separate feeds, and that's what enhances this division, divisiveness, and hyperpolarization that we're seeing across the country. And then third, we need meaningful algorithmic accountability and transparency. We need to know what's going on inside this black box, and Facebook has tried to cover that up every step of the way. Earlier this year, when Laura Edelson, a leading NYU researcher, began looking into publicly available ad data to determine the role that Facebook played in the run-up to the January 6th insurrection, Facebook deplatformed her. They pulled the plug, cut off access to the data, and haven't reinstated her yet. And so we need transparency and accountability to protect ourselves from these incidents in the future.
This is all super helpful, Rishi. You know, my question is, you're asking for Congress to pass a sweeping privacy law that would impact Facebook and protect consumers. I'm sure as a nonprofit, you've been in touch with lawmakers and decision makers in Washington. What do you think the chances that we get that, and when could it come?
I think it could come sooner than later. Look, the pressure has been rising on lawmakers to act on Facebook for a long time now. Pressure started increasing in 2016 when Facebook undermined the presidential election. Pressure started increasing after the Cambridge Analytica scandal. It increased even more after the UN found that Facebook played a, quote, determining role in the Rohingya genocide. It increased when Facebook played and facilitated one of the most violent attacks in our nation's capital in United States history. And it's been increasing over the course of the past year with the proliferation of COVID mis and disinformation and the expose from the Wall Street Journal that showed and demonstrated how uniquely harmful Facebook is to teens and teens' mental health, leading to increasing rates of anxiety, depression, body dysmorphia, research that Facebook covered up so that they can make an extra buck. And so now I think we've reached a boiling point where congressional action is needed and inaction is no longer acceptable. And so again, the Senate Commerce Committee has already begun holding hearings on what a federal privacy law could look like. Antitrust, a sweeping package of bills is moving through the Congress right now. And so I do expect before the end of this year, we'll see those pieces of legislation enacted. We'll see enhancements to existing children's privacy law like the KIDS Act, updates to COPPA that I think really can happen by the end of this year. And again, what needs to happen alongside that legislation is a congressional investigation that uses subpoena power and captures the full scope of societal harms. That is something that Congress can do tomorrow. They have that ability on their own.
All right, Rishi Bharwani, Director of Partnerships and Policy at Accountable Tech. Rishi, thanks again for taking the time.